Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a manifesto on the black experience in America when I put Melvin Van Peebles' Sweetback's Baadasss song against Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. And this one was a very hard one to like pick the decision on. I almost started this video undecided. I was going to try to talk myself into the decision, but I think I made it. So let's just dive right on into the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Melvin Van Peebles' Sweetback's Baadasss song, which is one of the most important films, not just in black cinema, but cinema in general. Melvin Van Peebles was one of like the greatest of the independent filmmakers. He had a hard time trying to break into Hollywood at a time where it was, basically segregated still in the late '60s, and so he kind of cut his teeth on making movies in France, where he did his first film, The Story of a 3-Day Pass, and you can definitely see the European influence on his work in Sweetback's Baadasss song, because there were a lot of filmmakers in America that tried to do the whole French New Wave shit or even of the European style, and most of them failed miserably. Melvin Van Peebles, on the other hand, takes all of that and blends it and makes it like, very American, and puts a lot of soul on it and stuff. And of course, he had finally been able to break into Hollywood, and he had a hit with Watermelon Man, and all the money that he got from that he pretty much invested in this film. And he made it look like he was making a porno film, so he could do it all non-union, do it his way, and make a film that was made by and for black people. And so he plays the titular character, Sweetback, and in one of the craziest transitions that I've ever seen in a movie. There's really nothing like it before, and there's really nothing like it after. The film opens with his son Mario Van Peebles playing the younger version of himself, and he's kind of a orphan kid that ends up in a whorehouse, and these whores all take him in, and one of them is even so kind as to teach him how to fuck, and through that's where he gets his nickname, Sweetback. So as like this whore is teaching this young kid how to fuck, it transitions in from the opening credits. You see him go from a boy to a man. And like I said, I've never seen a transition like that in a film that came before this or after this. And, you may make the argument, is that even good? But it's definitely art. It's definitely the kind of shit that Europeans would make. And then we find like the grown Sweetback. He's doing like sex shows in like this little like brothel type place that's owned by this guy named Beetle, and the cops come in one night. Somebody had got murdered, so they're looking for like, just anything to make it look like they're doing their job. So they take Sweetback with them as somebody that they can, kind of sort of question, so to speak, and all this stuff. So it starts out innocently enough, but then they end up picking up a young black revolutionary who, they decide they're going to beat the shit out of him. And so Sweetback is also handcuffed to this guy, and they when they uncuff him, they proceed to beat the shit out of the young black revolutionary, and so Sweetback just takes it upon himself to beat the shit out of the cops. And this is like a pivotal moment, because he starts out in the film, he doesn't really give a shit about what's going on. He's just doing sex shows, making money, but now he ends up becoming a revolutionary hero. So now the rest of the film is basically a chase movie where Sweetback's on the run, and of course the music is done brilliantly. The music is done by Earth, Wind, and Fire, and it's definitely a fucking full of colorful characters and stuff. It definitely captures the black community in L.A. and shit at that time, because of course the cast is credited as the black community in Breer Soul, and there's a lot of like fucked up cops in this shit. It's really definitely a movie of the time, and it's just a black manifesto on the experience that they go through in America, especially at that time and stuff. And of course, there's a lot of sex in it too, because granted, he was trying to make it look like a porno film so he could do it his own way. There's even a scene where he, fucks the shit out of this biker chick. They challenge him to a sex off or some shit. It's definitely weird and quirky, but it's also badass. It definitely lives up to its title, because there's a lot of shit that he does, on the run, and definitely eludes the cops. And he gets away, runs off into the sunset even after being shot, he heals himself, and then eats a lizard. There's all kinds of shit. And like everywhere he goes, he's either getting yelled at, or somebody's fucking him, or cops are trying to kill him. And it's definitely an exciting motion picture. It definitely documents the black experience at that time. And then we move forward to Spike Lee's "Do the Right Thing," where we're also where the director plays the main character. Here we see Spike Lee as Mookie. He's a pizza delivery guy, works for Sal's Famous Pizzeria that's owned by Danny Aiello, who's absolutely brilliant in this film. This would be the same year that Danny Aiello also was in Harlem Nights. And not really as big of an asshole as he was in Harlem Nights, but he definitely has his moments. And of course, his two sons, played by John Turturro and Richard Edson, they're kind of indifferent on the place, but like this place is like his baby. And a lot of people give him shit for being in a bad neighborhood, so to speak. The film itself, though, is basically just a 24-hour period of a day in the life of these characters on one of the hottest days of the year. So, of course, it being the hottest day of the year, tensions are high as a motherfucker, and everybody's just looking for something to get pissed off about. And insert Giancarlo Esposito, who plays Bugging Out. When he's in Sal's Famous, he noticed that there ain't any brothers on the wall. It's all Italian Americans. And so that sparks the argument between him and Sal. Because he's like, this is my place. I put whoever the fuck I want to. You get your own place. You can put as many brothers as you want on the wall. And so then he gets kicked out. And so now he's on a whole campaign to like boycott Sal's. And we also see like the film itself is filled with a lot of colorful characters. You got Ozzie Davis as the mayor, and he's full of insights. A lot of his lines are probably the best in the film. Samuel L. Jackson plays a radio DJ at a radio station called We Love Music, or We Love Radio, something like that. And then you also got Bill Nunn as Radio Raheem. He's got his big ass boombox, and he's always blaring Public Enemy. He don't like nothing else. And of course, there's a lot of references to other films. Of course, Spike Lee being a huge cinephile. The opening credit sequence is kind of a homage to Bye Bye Birdie, where we see Rosie Perez, who's also her first movie, and doing a very aggressive dance routine to Public Enemy's Fight the Power. And we also see Ruby Dee is in it as well, the sister mother, and Joie Lee, the sister of Spike Lee, she's in it as well, also playing Mookie's sister. And we just see these characters interact with each other all through the film. And of course, there's that sequence of Radio Raheem. He's got those gold knuckles, love and hate. And it's basically that same monologue that Robert Mitchum gives in The Night of the Hunter about the whole Cain and Abel thing and shit like that. And so, like I said, the film itself is filled with a lot of great moments. And you see a lot of great New York actors in it and shit. And of course, where the conflict though arises, of course, Bugging Out still persistent on boycotting Sal's. And of course, Radio Raheem's got beef because motherfucker told him to turn down his radio and shit. And of course, that's a huge no-no. Don't tell Radio Raheem to turn down his music. So then everything kind of culminates at the end of the day. Everybody's trying to go home, and they come in there, they're blaring the music, and then, fucking Danny Aiello's just had enough, so then he bashes the fucking radio in, and so then they're all fighting, and the fight erupts into the street, and the cops show up, and the cops end up killing Radio Raheem, a very, very poignant, because it's like something that's, even today, it's still relevant. We see that kind of shit happen. And then, of course, after they take Radio Raheem away, he's now dead. Mookie decides this is the time for him to act, so he takes a trash can and throws it through the window of Sal's, and that basically kicks off a riot. They burn it down, and they proceed to try to burn the rest of the neighborhood down, but they don't, because then the cops show up and shit pretty much calms down. But the film itself is very complex. There's a lot of like, if you want to dissect it. Now, me personally, the ending of it is kind of weird because, you just threw a garbage can through this man's window, and then you're going to go ask for your money, It's kind of fucked up. I get it. You work, you need to get paid, but you also, decided to take a stand and through the garbage can and fuck destroyed his property and shit. And the fact that he actually pays him is weird in and of itself, because I feel like that character wouldn't have paid him anyways. And but it does kind of basically is like a dissertation on the differing views of Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Because where Dr. Martin Luther King preached nonviolence, Malcolm X preached by any means necessary, self defense. And really, when you think about it, there was no point in like burning down Sal. Sal didn't kill Radio Raheem. The fucking cops did. But I guess you can't do shit to the cops, so you just decide to destroy your own neighborhoods. So now where the fuck you gonna get your pizza at? So it is one of those things where it's like it's a movie that causes you to think more than anything else, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the whole point of this little self-indulgent cinematic exploration is which one makes the better movie. And I would argue that Sweetback's Baadasss song is the better movie because it plays better as a movie. It also makes you think as well, but still manages to entertain thoroughly. Now, not to say that Do the Right Thing isn't full of entertainment. I mean, fuck, even just like that little group sitting outside with Frankie Faison and Robin Harris, and I forget the name of the other actor, but like that's all those exchanges are fucking brilliant. It's better at creating an atmosphere than it is really, and it is tangential with the plot. There's a conflict and everything, but I wouldn't say it's resolved, and I wouldn't say everybody's justified. The thing about it is with Sweetback's Baadasss song, there's no question in the justifications. Them cops deserve to get the shit beat out of them because they're beating the shit out of fucking basically who everybody deserved what they got in Sweetback's Baadasss song. I don't really think everybody deserved what they got in Do the Right Thing. So this round goes to Sweetback's Baadasss song because, like I said, it's the better movie and it's way more entertaining than Do the Right Thing. And granted, if we're going off of which one has the better message, it would probably be Do the Right Thing, but that's not the point of this series. The point of this series is which one is the better movie. And that's Sweetback's Baadasss song. So for anybody keeping score, that is 78 to 64. 70s are up by 14. Like I said, the 90s continue to do these 1-2 punches, but then the 70s just hold strong. It almost feels like the 70s were more self-aware than the 90s, and there's still a lot of confusion with shit, even to this day. So it's really hard to pick shit in this situation. But if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is one asshole's opinion on a long self-indulgent journey to figure out which decade was better for the cinema, the 70s or the 90s. It's looking like the 70s, but we still got a long way to go before we make that decision. So stay righteous.